This time on PedalBox, we address a fresh, new, interesting problem. Plywood shouldn't do that. So we're back dealing with a problem we thought we'd already solved once, and in fact, only partially solved once. But we do have a plan and also a question. So stick around till the end because we want your input on this, because we know what we'd like to do, but it does involve a load more work, aside from just fixing this splitter. Now the splitter that we have on here is phenolic ply. It's 9mm and it's resin impregnated, coated, everything. Great, absolutely fantastic. We were under the impression that that resin went a lot further through the wood than what this piece seems to. We have had actually a worse condition than the last floor that we did. This was the original stuff that we used, 12mm ply. We painted it in some exterior paint, so we were going to have to recover this from time to time, but we generally thought that this was going to be not so much water impervious enough, but this would stop a lot of the water soaking into it, would be repelled, and we can just keep on top of it with a cover over, it'll be fine. The answer, as you can see from this beautifully curved piece of plywood, was very much no. So that's no good. So we used phenolic ply. Now most commonly this is used in staging boxes, those big flight cases. It's used in trailer board, so you put the floor down, the sides down on a trailer, and it's generally weather resistant. Resistant is very much the key word that we've discovered here, because this is definitely not weatherproof. We sealed up all of the edges on this with both additional resin on the grain and paint. And there is a couple of spots in the wheel arch where we didn't seal it up, which does have a little mushroom growing on it. And I'll forgive it that, because that was our fault. But that corner is actually fine. There's nothing wrong with it. This corner, as I showed you before, is very much not fine. I can peel my way through this layer by layer and the whole thing comes apart. And the inside of it is wet, which is definitely not what I expected the resin to allow to happen. And we discovered this last time Chris was over, just as we were packing away. The side of this splitter was just hanging down slightly, and I went, oh, that's unfortunate, I'll just touch it, and fell completely off, split right down the line. And what we discovered was where that crack was all the way along was completely full of fungus. So this is definitely suboptimal. And as I say, I have kind of left this spoiler out as the tester piece to see how the elements would affect it. And if I'm brutally honest, eventually I expected something like this to happen, but more over the 10-year lifespan, not the 2-year lifespan, and not to this horrendous level. This is really a lot worse than I expected. In fact, the only part of this that is now solid is that corner. Even now, I just managed to catch the rest of the splitter and I managed to break another piece off it. So the whole thing, probably halfway across, is just completely rotten through. But not really rotten through, more like the moisture has got into the glue between the layers and it's delaminated that way. Because the wood itself isn't rotten. It's still fibrous. That is not rotten wood. But it is definitely not strong like plywood anymore. So, what are we going to do? Well, the obvious answer is carbon fibre. Much as we kind of wanted to go that route many, many moons ago and then looked at the price of doing a whole carbon fibre floor, and it was multiple thousands of pounds, which is probably equal to what we have in the build at the moment, it's just not practical. However, Easy Composites now do a kit for a splitter which is about 2 centimetres shorter front to back than the panel that we currently have. I think it's 2 meters by 70 centimeters, which is actually perfect. So not right now, because weather doesn't really matter, working on this is not critical, but soon we're going to order one of those kits and go through making a splitter with one of their systems, which should be a really interesting video. It's disappointing because it means that this splitter that we spent a lot of time on is completely garbage, and we are once again a step further back than we wanted to be.
Now obviously we've been spending a fair bit of time around the front of the car, staring at the splitter quite intently with nice furrowed eyebrows, trying to figure out what exactly happened. And since we've been spending so much time staring at the front of the car, these corners between the air curtains and the headlight clusters have been spending a lot of time in front of our field of view. And annoyingly, we can't really stop thinking about them, and that means we've got to solve a problem that we kicked down the road a long, long time ago. So the basic issue is that the headlight surround here doesn't line up very well with the side of the air curtain. There's a couple of other aesthetic things about the air curtain that I'll get to in a second. But the gist of it is we've got this like really kind of nasty sharp edge there where it steps back in. There's a potential IVA issue around the sharp corner on there. It's just generally not all that good. And it's a little bit tricky to do anything about because of the way the framework all fits together inside. But we kind of slammed it together a while ago. Realised it would be a problem, but didn't really have any ideas how to fix it. This is like we know it's bad, but we don't know how to make it good. Now we've had a couple of ideas since then, so we're going to take this as an opportunity to fix them. So fixing this is a little bit tricky to describe because obviously it's just a sea of black bodywork and we can't really get the camera inside because there's headlights and wheels and everything in the way. So I'm going to try and describe it a bit visually with my hands. So coming down the wheel arch here, we've got a piece of bent metal tube coming around reinforcing this whole inner edge. We've got another piece of reinforcing 10mm tube running across the bottom of the panel here, and then one coming up the front, not at the very, very front edge, because we've extended this a few episodes ago. We've got one coming down about here. And the front one is fine. The rear one is fine. The rear edge here is actually exactly where it needs to be to meet the air curtain. That's all nice and neat. But the one that runs across the bottom, unfortunately, backs into another piece of frame further in the car. So we've got the reinforcement plate here hitting, I think it's an upright for the headlight mount. So to actually move this in to get rid of that overhang, we've got to get rid of that tube. So we're just going to cut off this whole triangle, everywhere between these 3 points here, and just get rid of this metal, and that will also get rid of the reinforcing tube on the bottom. And then we're going to bring the air curtain up to match. So bringing the air curtain up is going to involve some new material, replacing that triangle that we've cut out of this and putting it on here. And then we're just going to have to replicate the same front radius that we've got from a piece of rod and rolled over sheet metal at the edge, just to make sure it passes the IVA, because it's the whole point of this exercise is getting rid of the IVA problem here. We want to make sure we don't add a new one with the new piece of material that we add. That's the easy part done. We've cut the bottom off. Now we just need to persuade it inboard a couple of millimeters. It's still pretty stiff, thankfully, despite losing a few bits of supporting material. So we're going to have to probably persuade it a little with a hammer, but thankfully we don't have to send it all that far because we are bringing this out a little bit more to match it. So let's see if we can sort that out. I think we're just about there. So if I trace a line down this panel and see where it would meet the air curtain now, it looks like, yeah, if that line carried on down, it would meet it about here, which looks quite far down, but because we've got to kick this out some, that's probably okay. So we're going to put our filler piece in there now, figure out a way to attach it onto the metal that's already there, and we should be away. Well, this is our new piece of metal. Adrian's just finished cutting this and shaping it, ready to go on. It's not quite exactly the right curvature yet to match, but off the car it's quite tricky to do. So we're going to tack it in place and then tap it a couple of times with the hammer to get it all lined up right, just to match the shape of the panel. So, down goes the mask. All right, that's just about all the welding now. It's tacked in around the front and bottom edges. We're not going to bother fully seam welding it, mostly because every time we try that, things start to warp, and we really don't need to here. It's not a structural piece, and we're going to be smoothing it all over with filler. But I do have to pack a whole bunch of weld in this top corner here, where we've got the radius coming around on a headlight surround. We just want to replicate that in this corner because we've got kind of a void in there now. There's also a very, very sharp point, which I think the IVA man will be unhappy about. But there's also a cosmetic thing that I want to patch up. So let's get that done, and then finally we can move on to filler and paint. So we've skipped ahead a wee bit. We are getting quite short on daylight, and we've shaped up the other side, cut the metal off, welded the new metal on, and we've got filler now on both sides. Now to my eye it looks a little bit rough because we are using the dregs of a tub, but as a first pass, just to fill in some of the voids here, it's plenty fine. We can always obviously tidy it up later with another layer of skim pass and a big old hit with a sander. This is looking pretty good. We just wanted to get something on while we've still got about an hour or so of daylight and a little while left before we hit dew point. So we've cheated a little bit. We've used the hot air gun to get some warmth into the metal. It's only about 10 degrees here, which is nearly warm enough to use this stuff, but it does seem to have taken fairly well. So hopefully when we get back out tomorrow, we'll be able to tidy this up quite nicely.
Now while the filler is drying, I'm going to go through what Chris was alluding to earlier with the other thing we were thinking about changing on this, but had basically put on the back burner because it's non-critical. And that is changing the front edge of this air curtain to make this bottom edge a much wider radius rather than being quite a sharp corner going all the way up. Now the problem with that is if we're doing that in metal, building a structure around the bottom of it, actually making that shape is very, very complicated. And I've tried making a sharp corner or sharpish corner into a wide radius before on the back of the car around those tail lights. And that was over a 3-foot span, and that was bad enough. Doing it in a foot and getting it looking nice, I think that's going to be very challenging. However, having got a 3D printer, that actually takes all of the difficulty of that away. We can model what we need because it is a relatively small part, probably print it in 2 pieces, add it into this, cut a hole, and then attach it onto the remaining structure, filler over the top of it, smooth it down, and it'll be fine. Now the real problem is this is already done. This is probably fine to go through the IVA, all of the corners are rounded, but it does look a bit goofy. And we have had a couple of comments saying it looks very flat at the front, and people aren't wrong about that when they see it, particularly at the shows, and they can really look around it and go, oh God. So that's kind of been on my mind. I think with the splitter now having to be redone, and we need to look at the new mounting positions underneath here and where this corner is actually going to be, that's been the catalyst to look at this again and go, should we do this? We can take these panels off and we can actually do it in the garage when it's raining. So it's an ideal winter project almost. However, I do have an engine to rebuild on the Golf indoors, which is an ideal winter project. So I don't particularly want to add another one on. So the real question here is, let's assume with an infinite amount of time and abilities and everything else, do you think it's worthwhile changing that just for the sake of rounding off this corner? I'd like to hear what you think in the comments. Does it look good enough with this big flat panel? This is not something we're going to do in this episode today. Far, far from it. This is mostly something that if we get to, we're going to be rained out the entire weekend, but we've planned to get some stuff done. Could we do it? Assuming the Golf is all done at that point. The rain in the spring does last a long time. So let us know in the comments whether you think we should change this from being a big flat front to being a little bit more curved going around. And if so, we'll start trying to come up with some designs and maybe some 3D models to see how that would actually look like in a future episode or possibly on a live stream.
Well, it's been a while since we had to break the lamps out as we've done here and actually shot the end of an episode properly in the dark as we have today. And I'm a little bit sorry because obviously this is new black paint on the car. It doesn't really show up all that well at night, but nonetheless, I think we've done a pretty good job of getting this all together. With a closer view and with the light out now as I wave it around here, you can probably get a bit of a feel for how good the paint came out. It's not great, but it is evening in the winter, which isn't really a great time to be doing paint. And as with everything else we've been doing, this is only meant to be protective. It's not actually the final paint finish, which we still haven't decided what colour it's going to be. So as long as this keeps the rust out, we're pretty happy. And there you can see we've got a really nice alignment now. It's a nice flush fit down between both panels. We've got rid of that big nasty overhang that we had before, and the slash down from the front of the headlight surround down onto a previous mounting point actually looks fine. You know, not being horizontal really hasn't hurt the overall look of the car at all. This has come out really, really nicely. So we thought we were going to have to put some rubber strip in here just to take off the edges and everything, but actually the gap is so small, we've managed to close this up quite tightly. We might not need to. There are sort of restrictions and requirements around gaps below a certain size, don't need them, so we might be okay here. And with that, we're all done for this episode. Thanks very much for watching, and please do leave a comment down below with what you think we should do with these air curtains. Adrian and I can't agree what to do with them. I think we should leave them as they are. I quite like the big slab front. He'd obviously like to radius them off, as we've said. So since we're undecided, we might as well put it to you guys. Now, if you'd like, you can support us directly on patreon.com/PedalBox show. We've got a bunch of different tiers there that you can support us at. Higher tiers get a discount at shop.pedalbox.show, where you can buy any of the hats that I'm not wearing, the hoodies that I'm not wearing, or the mugs that I am actually drinking from. Although if you buy one, it won't come quite as tea-stained as my one is. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. Follow us on all the usual social media platforms. We're PedalBox Show just about everywhere, and we'll see you next time.